Ah, I have access.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the reemergence of the Denver Area Access User Group. We've been on hiatus for a little while as we've had some organizational changes, some leadership. Folks have retired. In fact, we'll have a little bit about retiring access developers later in today's presentation. But we're back and we're embarking on a couple of different series into the future. The first one is going to be short technical presentations on aspects of Microsoft Access, primarily focused around modernizing and cloudifying access. And then the second thing that we're going to be doing here at the Denver Area Access User Group is we're going to be interviewing important people and companies in the access world and hopefully giving you a chance to see what people are doing, what sort of solutions they have, maybe ideas about stuff you can do, and also contacts that you can refer to if you're inclined or need to do so. So all that in the exciting months and years ahead. So it's great to be back, and we are excited and delighted and honored to have as our initial guest in this interviews series Mark Steffen from Winning Solutions. And Mark has been at this company. They do a lot of access work. They do a lot of modernization. Mark, welcome. It's great to have you here with the Denver Area Access Users Group. And I don't know, let's start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and about Winning Solutions.
Great. Thank you, George. I'm excited to be here today. As George said, I work for a company called Winning Solutions, Inc., WSI. We're a Microsoft Access first custom application development shop. And I've been with the company for about 26 years. I came from the PC system builder background where I used to put PCs together back when that was a craft. And some people still do it today, but it's not as big a thing as it was in the 90s. So with that, I want to begin by thanking George for inviting me and thanking the Denver Access Users Group for having me. Some or all of this presentation may be known to you. It's a little hard to judge to the audience because I haven't had the pleasure of meeting all of you in person, but I hope it will benefit all of you in some way or another. My subject is Microsoft Access Modernization, but I want to be clear what I mean by that. This is not a presentation about abandoning access in all cases, and it is not an argument that every application belongs in a browser. It is about protecting the value that already exists in a working access system while improving the parts that have become limiting, risky, or difficult to support. I'll share my thoughts about why access remains so productive, where it generally falls short, and how our team here at WSI decides whether to keep, strengthen, extend, or replace an access application. I'll also use our client's wind turbine database as a concrete example of how access can have a modern user interface, which is just one small piece of the big puzzle. The phrase I want you to remember is simple. Access can look modern. Now, the central question for me is not whether access can look modern. Access definitely can, as you will see in upcoming slides. The distinction matters because the word modern can indicate something older is useless. A browser interface may look newer, but it is not automatically easier to use, less expensive, more reliable, more secure, or better matched to a particular workload, no matter what the people who like doing everything browser-based will tell you. In the same way, an access front end is not automatically outdated simply because it runs on the Windows desktop. In certain deployments, this disadvantage is an advantage. If all the users are already running on Windows desktops, being able to run on different desktops isn't an issue. When we look at an older access database, we evaluate impact of stale user interface on user adoption, usability, and confidence in the system. It's hard to believe that something as just the way something looks can impact end users' attitudes so much. Quite often, it means preserving the productive access experience and changing how it looks or where the back end is located. Winning Solutions was founded in Ames, Iowa in 1996, and Access has always been part of our work throughout the company's history. Access gave a small development team something extremely valuable, the ability to automate business processes in a single, complete working solution. We would design the tables, build the forms, write the business logic, create the reports, and put a useful system in front of the client without assembling a large technology stack first. Of course, you already know that. You do that. As our clients and their requirements grew, our toolkit grew as well. SQL Server gave us a stronger data platform. .NET and web development gave us additional interface and integration options. Azure added cloud infrastructure and managed services. Automation gave us more ways to remove repetitive work. In fact, I'll pause just to mention that, and maybe you've seen this, where people used Visual Basic 5 and 6 as the front end, and they used Access as the back end, because in the 90s, back ends like Oracle were so expensive, nobody could afford them. And so if you've been around the community that long, or you've seen some of these where databases where they say it's an Access database, but it's really a combination of VB5 or VB6 and Access, those things are still out there, and they're a big opportunity for us. The important point is that these technologies did not make our Access knowledge obsolete. They expanded the range of problems we could solve. I believe Access has endured because it compresses the distance between an idea and a working business system. In one environment, we can model the data, create the relationships, build forms, write VBA, develop queries, produce reports, automate Microsoft Office, and connect with outside systems. That combination is unusually powerful, and frankly, it's not fully appreciated or understood by the people who are unfamiliar with it. And so sometimes you have to make a point to educate them about it. The key is not that every individual component is the most sophisticated tool available. Although I'd put Microsoft Access's report system up against almost any report system in the world. The key is that the components work together. A developer can sit with a user, understand a process, build a form, and get meaningful feedback very quickly. I am sure many of you do this every workday. That speed changes the economics of custom software. It allows small and mid-sized organizations to automate specialized processes that might justify or never justify the cost of a larger development platform. It also lets a lot of internal experts capture knowledge that would remain in spreadsheets, email, messages, paper forms, or other person's memory. Simply for those business people who are very sharp people and understand their business, .NET and C# can be too challenging. VBA can be something they can wrap their mind around. Again, I'm sure most of you watching already know this. Access creates a very fast feedback loop. Users can react to a working form instead of trying to imagine a system from a long requirements document. That almost always leads to better decisions. Second, Access supports a rich desktop experience. It handles information-dense forms, keyboard-driven workflows, detailed reports in Microsoft Office integration extremely well. For many internal business processes, those capabilities are more important than running on every possible device. Third, an organization can own the application of the source code. Now, of course, they can own .NET source code too, but can they read it? The business is not necessarily paying a subscription for every user and every specialized workflow. Access runtime. It can maintain the system internally, work with its own original developer, or engage another qualified firm. Finally, Access has a broad set of escape hatches. It can communicate through ODBC, COM automation, web APIs, SQL Server and Azure SQL, and other services. The flexibility is why an Access application can start small and still become part of a much larger business architecture. The same freedom that makes Access powerful can also make an Access system fragile. A capable person can solve serious business problems very quickly. And that is how many mission-critical applications are born, by a business user at a business, not a programmer. Someone understands the work, sees the existing tools are not sufficient, and builds a system that immediately creates value. Perhaps some of you listening now are that person, and that's great. The difficulty begins when that capable person gets in trouble because they do not understand proper table design or the importance of data normalization. That is not an access problem. I stress that is not an access problem. But some of Access's less than stellar reputation is a byproduct of how people use it, not Access itself. And that's not fair. And it's right for you to point that out. The right response is not to criticize the person who solved the original problem or Access itself. The right response is for you to step in and help the organization preserve value of that solution while adding documentation, repeatable deployment, data normalization, backup and recovery, testing, security, succession planning. Access often reveals organizational risk. It allows one person to accomplish so much. Modernization can turn an individual accomplishment into a system the organization can confidently rely on. If we want to modernize responsibly, we have to be honest about the specific and boundaries of Access. The first boundary is reach. Access is a Windows desktop application. If the system must serve outside customers, mobile users, Macs, Linux, or a public audience, we usually need another interface. The secondary boundary is concurrency and connectivity. A file-based Access backend can work well for the right environment, but it becomes risky when many users are writing at once, the network is unreliable, or people are connecting across distant locations. And a lot of people just don't understand that, and you're going to have to explain it to them. The third boundary is governance. Every local distribution can lead to old front ends, shadow copies, and inconsistent releases. Thank goodness you can follow the shortcut properties on the desktop to figure out where they put their Access database. And how many times have you done that and opened up a folder where there's 30, 40, 50 copies of the Access front end and some copies of the back end with all sorts of different names and dates? We see it all the time. Security can also become a boundary when the organization needs centralized identity. Detailed permissions, regulatory controls, and stronger auditing. Integrating Azure Active Directory with Access is something that you need to be good at if you're going to work in those types of organizations. Finally, continuity becomes a concern when one developer holds most of the system knowledge. We see this repeated time and again where there was a dedicated employee at a business and they offered to make an Access database aside from their regular duties. And they may have worked there for 20 years and spent 3 or 4 hours a week building a great Access database and accumulating a mountain of technology debt for their employer with no ill intention at all. But it just happened. It just grew and grew and grew as people asked for more features.
This is a great slide, Mark, and I think all of us have sort of encountered some of these things, and then and maybe you're going to talk about this, forgive me, but at the same time that as we get networking and then internet and then cloud and then phones, and so we have all this growth in application development and consumption that's happening outside of the Access universe, whereas before all that was happening in Win32 25 years ago. And so it seems like almost that explosion in other development options sort of exposed maybe or brought to light some of these boundaries or limitations of Access. And you and I talked about this before, and then I'll get back to you, but how much of Microsoft Office was webified, cloudified. So you have a web version of Excel and you can store your Excel file in the cloud, and it supports multi-users, let's say out of OneDrive. But Access never got that. So it seems like one of the challenges is recognizing the limitations that Access had, which this great slide does. How do we go about making it great given the limitations that it has compared to the other Office applications and given the amazing explosion of what's happening in the cloud?
Right, exactly, George. And that's a little bit more challenging with Access. We have to work a little bit harder, but that allows us to bring value to the table. And if you're someone who bills for your time or works, for a paycheck that involves Access development, then you bring that value. And that's basically where SQL Server comes in and your two key options, which is one, put the Access front end on a virtual Windows machine server and RDP to it, or continuing with the Access on the desktop, but have it linked to an Azure SQL backend in the cloud. Those are about the two best options right now, given that it's not there's no web version of Access available, and I have no sense that there is ever going to be one. So finally, continuity is a concern when one developer holds all the system knowledge. And so that's something that you may have no control over, because someone may not come to you for help as an Access person until that person that has all that knowledge has retired or is out of the picture. And then you just have to do the best you can from that point forward, which can be pretty challenging sometimes. Oops. So, okay. So when I think about modernization, there are 4 possible actions: keep, strengthen, extend, and replace. So keep is a valid choice when the system still fits the business. In that case, modernization may mean just better documentation, a reliable backup process, a split front end and back end, and disciplined deployment. So that's that can be sufficient, because in a lot of cases, if you're dealing with the end customer who has the Access database, and it's a very small business, and they've been doing 4 or 5, 6, 10 hours a week of work on that over 20 or 30 years, recreating that in a .NET application can just be something that they can't possibly afford ever. And so you don't have a choice. You have to make Access keep going. You have to get it on 64-bit or do whatever it takes to keep it useful. So strengthen is an appropriate main pressure point in the data layer. We keep the Access front end while moving to SQL Server or Azure SQL. There's still a lot of Access databases out there with an Access backend. And one of the greatest ways to breathe new life into that Access front end is the SQL backend. That can improve concurrency, backup, reliability, and central management. Extend is the right move when the system needs additional reach. When we can add a web portal or an API, Power BI, scheduled automation, or another service without discarding the existing application. For example, if you're going to build an Access database, or the customer that has the Access database that you're working with does something like a lawn mowing service, and they want the people out mowing the lawns to be able to enter the mow information as they are out there in the field from their phone. You're not going to be able to run Access on their phone. So you're going to have to build a separate web front end that connects to the same Azure SQL or SQL Server backend to store the data. But you keep all of the work that was done to create what I call the back office Access front end. There's no reason to throw that away. Now, replace becomes appropriate when the user experience itself must fundamentally change, or when the operating model no longer fits the Windows desktop application, or when the customer is uncertain about Access's future. And let's face it, Microsoft doesn't always give the greatest and most thorough guidance on what is the future of Access. And so that leads a lot of people who have Access databases to worry about the future. And if that's a concern, and if it's within their means to replace their Access application to alleviate that fear, by all means, that's an option. There are now 4 levels of maturity, and replacement is not automatically the right answer. The best choice is the smallest move that resolves the real constraint while protecting the value of the organization already has. Okay, this diagram expresses the architectural principle that guides much of our work. Move the pressure point, not the whole application. So on the left is the Access user interface. If users are productive and the forms reports fit the workflow, that may be the part we most want to preserve. As we talked about, the next layer is SQL Server and Azure SQL. We move the data when central management, concurrency, backup, or reliability has become the constraint. And of course, you can even run out of space in SQL Server Express. Then you have to move to a paid version of SQL Server, which is, of course, why Microsoft offers the free one. The API and web layer adds reach. It allows another application, an outside user, a mobile device, or a partner system to interact with a controlled part of the solution, just like we talked about on the previous slide. The automation layer handles repetitive work, such as scheduled imports, notifications, document processing, and integration tasks. The important idea is that these layers can change independently. We do not need to recreate a mature access interface simply because the data needs a stronger home. We do not need to expose the whole database to the internet simply because the customer needs one web form. A focused architecture preserves investment and reduces migration risk. Okay, now finally get to see a modern access application, which is one of the ones that we built. So a system can be intentionally desktop, web, or hybrid, as we talked about. This is a complete access desktop exclusive app. At the experience layer, the internal power users may continue working with access because it gives them the dense forms and reports that we talked about. The service layer contains the APIs, integrations, and scheduled automation. Those functions become easier to monitor and reuse, and they are separated from the desktop interface. The data layer may use SQL Server, Azure SQL, or another governed data source. That gives the organization central location for backup and data management. The operations layer makes identity, deployment, monitoring, and recovery explicit rather than leaving them as informal knowledge. The structure creates architectural freedom. Each layer can evolve on its own schedule, and the organization can improve data today, add a portal next year, replace a particular interface later, if the business case can support it, and of course, the budget. The goal is not to use the maximum number of cloud services. The goal is to create clean boundaries around responsibilities. Okay, now we can make these ideas concrete, especially the one which I'm kind of focused on of the many things we've discussed today, which is the user interface. I want us to look at this as a working business system, which it is. The most important question is not what version of Access it uses or how many tables it contains. The most important question is what is the value is already embedded in it? Does it look modern and professional? Is someone going to look at that and say, that was obviously created in the 90s? No, I don't think anyone that's looking at the screen would honestly say that. A mature database contains more than data. It contains a sequence of work, terms users understand, the calculations they trust, the reports that help them accurately assign, in this case, energy production down to the individual wind turbine level. So as we look at this database, I want you to notice the working knowledge represented on the screen. That is the foundation we want to preserve while we decide which technical responsibilities belong elsewhere. So the intuitive navigation, the user interface allows them to compare an external report right next to the performance values that they entered on the left to make sure they're correct. And this is a system that also stores external reports and documents and utility bills and things like that as separate files. And you can see that that's done separate from the database to not overwhelm the capacity of an Access or SQL Express database. So I recommend cloud-defined parts of a system needed to meet the usage model. And so one of the things that you can do, and I encourage it, and we do it every day, is get the end client's managed service provider, or MSP, involved in the deployment, the backup, the recovery, and the governance. Sometimes they don't want to do it, but you don't have to do everything either. You may need to train the MSP if they are not familiar with Microsoft SQL Server. We see a lot of MSPs that are very good at setting up M365 and Active Directory, but they just don't have sometimes any or very little Microsoft SQL Server experience. And that's where you can help them out. Cloud services include their own costs. Let's remember Azure SQL is not free. There are hosting charges, subscription, new security responsibilities, new development skills. Those costs may be justified, but they should be connected to a clear benefit. And one of the ways the MSPs can build value and build a tighter relationship is them managing all that. So you need to decide, is the MSP going to manage Azure, or are you going to manage it, or is someone at the business going to manage it? And who's going to sell the subscription? These are all things to remember that you want to cover and maybe have thought about before you go meet with a customer so that you don't have to think about it on the fly while you're right there. So, George, I think you have some questions you wanted to ask me. George, you might be muted. I'm not able to hear you.
I'm sorry. It's, we've been away from Zoom for a little while with the group, getting my Zoom mojo back. Thank you. No, this is great, and I love the move the pressure point, not the whole application, Mark, because it's often based on my experience. I know that you guys have done much more. It's almost never an all or nothing, and there's both a partial approach and there's an incremental approach. And I can think of one large project that I worked on, and I believe I have a video about that on the website, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well as some of your links. But it was a big, giant internal access application, and so we had deployment issues. We had the whole development deployment pipeline. We had the issue of different machines having different configurations and having to deal with that. And so we did it piece by piece. So one thing was, well, the people in the field need to have a very small view, but the main access application is so rich and so powerful. So we kept the access app and we migrated the back end to an Azure SQL database. And then we put the access app in a VM, which, as you know, you can run it as if it's locally. So you click a local access icon on your desktop, and it'll launch the Access VM instance. And then once that data was in Azure SQL, then I could very quickly create a very small mobile web page, which .NET does quite easily. And so people in the field could be entering data, and that was immediately in the same back end that the people in the back office could access. And it was a relatively small incremental path. And I know you've talked about other factors that in that move and other ways you can go. But yeah, absolutely. So love your sort of your thoughts. I really enjoyed the benefits of access. And even today, as I've been doing .NET for only 2 years less than access, so over 20 years. And I still, if I need to design an application, a data-driven application, I will often start with access. Launch that form, drag stuff around, create my relationships, and it's just such a great rapid application development tool. You mentioned that. I still don't know if it's been surpassed. I would argue that Power Apps, for the good that it is and what it is not access, and I'm not sure it ever will be. But I'll turn it back over to you, and maybe we're getting toward the end of our talk, but maybe any concluding thoughts you have about this, and then I'd also like to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what Winning Solutions does, because we have the two issues. We have people that want to modernize that may not have the skill set. And then the other thing that we've been having here locally is, even among our membership, as people get to retirement age, they often have a set of clients that they're looking to continue to support or to be supported without them doing it. So maybe talk a little bit about Winning Solutions and what you guys do on those fronts.
Great. Thanks, George. So, we want to meet the project where it's at today. So some organizations want to start, and this is one of the things that we offer, start from a proven template rather than a blank database. It's very hard to go in and convince someone to buy something that doesn't exist. And so I would encourage you, when you run into that problem in your practice, you may want to look to one of the templates that we offer as a starting point so you have something to show them. Now, using an access template can provide a foundation for an organization's workflow and save time on common features. Where they really work best are for small point-specific solutions. So you can browse hundreds of templates on our website, and there'll be a link in the video description to those, and I encourage you to check those out. One of the most popular ones we have is a clone of the Outlook calendar system in 100% Access VBA. And so that's like super appealing to all the VBA developers out there. So that's our most popular one. And that one works, not necessarily, it can be the basis for a database, but it can also plug into, and you can merge it into your existing Access database rather than spending several hundred hours to write a calendar system that's that complex. So other clients need targeted help. A report may be broken, performance may have deteriorated, a database may be corrupted, or deployment failed when they switch to Windows 11. A focused engagement can solve an immediate problem, such as getting the application running and working in 64-bit Office, which I'm sure has driven a lot of work for you. It's driven a lot of work for us. And that's a good thing, although part of us wants these applications to run forever without changes, but that's just not realistic. So we also partner with independent developers. So if you're an independent developers or internal team, so if you're someone who's visiting this users group as part of an internal team or internal person at a company doing Access development, and you need to bring in some more firepower, we'd be happy to be that additional strength. And on Access, you may want help with SQL Server, if you had something you're not familiar with, or Azure or web development. These other areas, if you're just totally focused on Access, there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. But we can support you in these other areas while you continue your leadership on the project and being in front, facing the customer first, and we're just your subcontractor. So, for larger needs, we can deliver a broader modernization. We can combine Access with SQL Server, and if it is appropriate to do a full rewrite in .NET, we have a great team for doing that, and they're very experienced at transforming Access and rewriting Access applications into .NET, because most of the people on that team here at Winning Solutions are former Access developers, just as you are. So, speaking to the Access developers directly and watching this and thinking about retirement are the things that George talked about earlier. And we know you have, sometimes these clients are not just clients, they're your friends. And they're maybe younger than you are, and they're planning to continue their business for a long time. And even more than they do how much they rely on the Access database you created. So you have some options, and part of that is your user group community right here. So there may be a fellow member of the user group that you want to have step in and take over or work with you. And then, or another firm like Winning Solutions that is focused on Access, but you've had a chance to qualify and make sure they're qualified to work with your clients. Or based on what you heard today, or you might have a lot of questions or might want to interview us and put us to the test and see if we're the right firm to work with your client going forward. We do have a specific program for this. We do offer compensation for it, for the transfer, and then for payments that go to you for our future collected billings. So it's not just a handed over type of thing. We understand that you've created a lot of value there, and we want to compensate you for that value. And we can talk about that if that's something you're interested in. My contact information is up here on the screen. So in closing, Access remains an extraordinarily productive platform for business applications. We did some work about 2 or 3 years ago for a very, very large government contractor, and they had a very skilled .NET team. And they brought us in because they had zero Access expertise, and they had a government agency thrust a huge Access application upon them, probably something like the one George was describing earlier. And we were able to deliver and keep that Access application going. They weren't able to afford to rewrite the whole thing, did everything they wanted, and their lead .NET developer came back and said, I had no idea what Access could do or how powerful it was. And and he said echoed some of the things George said earlier about, maybe this really is the best, most productive development environment available today. So that meant a lot coming from someone who was a pure .NET developer in high-end large accounts. doesn't do any work in small business at all large government agency work. So that I think that should make us all feel good. And of course, as you've seen in this presentation, it can look like a modern application. I think the application I showed is something that would be very difficult for a person to come up and say, I know that's an old access application. I don't think they could make that choice. So we have a couple of websites, our WayneSolutionsInc.com and our Access Expert site, where links will be below. The Access Expert site is where all the templates are, if that's something you're looking for. If you just want to learn more about us, the WayneSolutionsInc.com site is great. So George, thank you again for the invitation, and thank all of you for your time. I'm looking forward to your questions in the comments section.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. It was great. I ran across a really great article that Winning Solutions had published on LinkedIn, and I reached out to you guys, and it was great meeting you, and so many shared, experiences and development approaches. So it's been really great. I want to let the viewers know that we're going to have a series of simple how-to videos on cloudifying access, at least to give you kind of an idea of the basics and how that works going forward. And also on things like access and the future of access and access in general, we'll have some interviews. For example, we plan to have a roundtable with some access MVPs. I will be speaking with the Microsoft Access product team and having that video hosted here as well. So a whole lot coming in the future. And Mark, again, thanks so much for taking the time to share with us your experiences modernizing access. And I'd like to just leave it with that great tagline: move the pressure point, not the whole application. Access is still a great tool, and it may be that due to market pressures or customer desires, there may be a pressure point that you can handle just by dealing with that specific instance and still keep the general access application functioning as is for the user. So Mark, again, great. Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you again here at the Denver Area Access Users Group. Bye for now.